She handed me divorce papers on a Tuesday morning, called my basement lab a fire hazard with a 10-year expiration date, and told me to keep the house. I signed everything she put in front of me, thanked her for the coffee she hadn't made, and watched her drive away in the car I'd paid off 2 years earlier. 8 months later, a trade journal ran a story with my photograph on the cover. $31 million. Exclusive licensing rights. Revolutionary membrane technology. Her attorney saw it first. He called her while she was in spin class, and she had to step off the bike to take the news standing still. My name is Sherman Aldcroft. I'm 54 years old. I spent 21 years married to a woman who used to say she loved me because I was steady. Her word, not mine. Steady like a foundation, she'd say in the early years, leaning her head against my shoulder on the back porch after dinner. Steady like something you build a house on. Somewhere between year 12 and year 15, steady became boring. I didn't notice the exact moment it happened. These things don't come with timestamps. She served me the papers on a Tuesday. That detail still bothers me, not the papers themselves, but the Tuesday. Like she'd planned it for a weekday. Efficient, slotted between a dentist appointment and a lunch reservation. She was dressed up when she walked into the kitchen. Silk blouse, the dark green one she used to wear to work functions. Hair done. She slid a manila envelope across the counter, like she was passing me the electric bill. "I'd like to keep this civil," she said. "No drama." I opened the envelope. Read through the terms. She'd taken her time with it. The condo we owned downtown, her car, our joint savings, her mother's furniture that had been in our dining room for 6 years. She left me the house. I picked up the pen she'd set on top of the envelope. "That's it?" she asked when I handed the signed papers back. I nodded. She looked at me the way you look at someone who doesn't react the way you expected. A little confused, a little annoyed that there was nothing to argue against. She tucked the envelope into her bag, said she'd be in touch through the attorney, and walked out through the garage. Our dog Bo followed her to the door. Old habit. She didn't look down at him. I stood in the kitchen until I heard her car back out of the driveway. Then I poured the rest of my coffee down the sink and went downstairs to my lab. I'd known about Dylan Haas for 4 months before she handed me those papers. Found out the way most people find out. A receipt for a restaurant I'd never been to. A hotel charge on a shared account she'd forgotten to switch to her personal card, a name that appeared twice in her calendar under client dinner, on nights when she came home smelling like someone else's apartment. Dylan was a property developer, drove a white Range Rover, wore his watch the way men wear watches when they want you to notice the watch. I looked him up online. He had one of those LinkedIn profiles that was more personal brand than professional history. I said anything. Didn't say anything. Didn't confront her. Didn't cry or put my fist through anything. I went downstairs, sat at my workbench under the fluorescent light, and got back to work on the thing she'd been calling a waste of time for the better part of a decade. The lab was a converted basement. I'd done the renovation myself the winter of our 9th year, poured concrete flooring, proper ventilation, a dehumidifier that ran year-round to protect the equipment. My wife called it the dungeon. Her friends thought it was eccentric at best, pathetic at worst. She used to apologize for it at dinner parties. "He disappears down there on weekends," she'd say, laughing like it was a harmless quirk, like I was a man building model trains. What I was actually building was a ceramic nanomembrane filtration system capable of removing pharmaceutical compounds, industrial solvents, and heavy metals from contaminated wastewater, passively, without chemical additives, using nothing but pressure gradient and membrane geometry. No moving parts, no energy input beyond what the water's own flow provided. The concept had started as a side project during my graduate research, a thread I kept pulling on because no one else seemed interested in it. Every water treatment company I'd approached over the years wanted bolt-on chemistry. Add this compound, adjust that pH. Nobody wanted to rethink the membrane itself, so I kept working on it alone, in the basement, on weekends and late evenings, while my wife was on the phone with her sister, or out with friends whose names I couldn't keep straight. The first real breakthrough came on a Friday night in February, 3 years before she filed. I was testing the 43rd iteration of the membrane geometry, running contaminated sample water from a municipal source through the stack at varying pressures. The output readings didn't make sense at first. I rechecked the instruments, rechecked my math, ran the sample again. The numbers held. Pharmaceutical compound removal rate, 97.4%. Heavy metal capture, 96%. Zero chemical intervention. I sat with that result for a long time, not moving, just staring at the printout. Then I went upstairs. My wife was asleep. I stood in the kitchen and ate a bowl of cereal in the dark, alone, holding the kind of news I couldn't tell anyone yet. The person I eventually told was Stanton Hughes. We'd met at an environmental engineering conference in Denver 8 years before. He'd sat next to me at a panel discussion on industrial water reclamation, asked better questions than anyone else in the room. We'd stayed in occasional contact since. He ran a private investment group focused on industrial process technology. Quiet operation, no public profile, which was exactly how he preferred it. I called him the month after the February results, told him I had something he should see in person. He flew out on a Thursday, spent 3 hours in my basement, asking questions I'd spent years learning how to answer. When he was done, he sat back on the stool at my secondary bench and looked at me with the expression of someone who has just made a decision. "How far along are the patents?" he asked. "Filed and protected through a Delaware trust," I said. "Separate from personal assets." He nodded slowly. Already understood what that meant, even if I hadn't needed it to mean anything at the time. "Good habit," he said. Stanton arranged quiet funding through the trust over the next 2 years. Materials, testing equipment, third-party validation data. No press releases, no announcements. Just resources appearing where I needed them, steady and without fanfare. He'd connected me with 2 independent testing labs that confirmed my results without knowing what they were evaluating. He'd arranged preliminary conversations with municipal water authorities and industrial clients struggling with EPA compliance costs. By the time my wife filed for divorce, the patent stack was solid. The validation data was bulletproof, and Stanton had 3 serious buyers circling. The timing was hers. The situation was mine. The day after she signed the papers and left, I called Stanton. "Timeline just moved," I told him. He was quiet for a moment. "How do you feel?" "Ready," I said. "Good. I'll make some calls." The first sign of trouble came 6 weeks after she moved out. I'd installed security cameras in the lab 2 years earlier. Not because I suspected anyone specifically, but because the equipment downstairs represented more than I could afford to replace, and my homeowner's policy had limits. The cameras were motion activated, cloud stored. I checked the feed maybe once a month. I was reviewing footage, looking for a missing calibration log when I saw it. Reed Colby, walking through my lab on a Wednesday afternoon. Reed and I had worked together at an engineering firm in the early years of my career. We'd stayed loosely connected through the years, an occasional lunch, emails about industry news, the kind of friendship that runs mostly on shared history and geographic proximity, rather than any real current investment. He knew I was working on something in my basement. I'd mentioned it broadly, the way you mention a long project without revealing the specifics. He'd always expressed vague encouragement. Smart guy, people used to say about Reed. Knows everybody. In the footage, he wasn't visiting, he was working, photographing my bench setup with his phone, opening my file drawers, spending 20 minutes at my primary workstation, scrolling through data. My wife had let him in. I could see it in the timestamp. She'd come back that afternoon to collect remaining furniture. I'd been at a client site. The camera caught them arriving together. I watched the footage 3 times. Then I pulled up the cloud archive. Reed had been in my lab 4 times over the past 5 months. I called Stanton that evening. "Someone's been accessing the lab," I said. "A former colleague. He's been photographing my bench and data for months. My ex-wife's been letting him in." A long pause. Then, "Do you know who he's feeding the information to?" I had a guess. Dylan had money and motive. A water treatment acquisition would have been a significant asset to a property development portfolio. The kind of leverage that could shift his position in commercial real estate deals considerably. And he had my wife's ear, which meant He'd had a window into my life, wide enough to know the broad shape of what I was building, even if he didn't know the specifics. Don't confront either of them, Stanton said. Can you secure the lab tonight? Already in the process, I said. He paused. The real materials, where are they? Safe. The prototype on the bench was a working unit 6 months ago. I replaced the core membrane stack last spring. What's down there now is the old geometry, the one that failed at iteration 31. Looks identical from the outside. A longer pause. You were expecting something like this. Not Reed specifically, but something. Stanton's voice went flat and even. Good. Move everything sensitive off-site tonight. Change your access codes. Send me the footage. Our attorneys will want the full record. The break-in happened on a Saturday night 3 weeks later. I was visiting my brother 2 hours east. My wife had mentioned my absence to someone. Her habits were predictable, and I'd let the information reach the right ears through a mutual acquaintance, casually, like a man who had nothing to hide. I'd been careful not to mention the trip to Reed directly. He'd gotten the information some other way. My phone notified me at 10:51 p.m. Motion detected, lab camera. I sat on my brother's couch and watched 2 figures move through my basement in real time. They'd come through the side door with a pry bar. Quick, practiced. They knew exactly where to go, straight to the workbench, straight to the prototype stack. One of them brought a hammer. The casing shattered in 3 strikes. They pulled the internal components, swept them into a bag. The second figure took my secondary laptop and 2 external drives. They were out in 9 minutes. I didn't move. Just watched the screen until the motion alerts stopped. Then I called the police, reported a break-in, and drove home the next morning. The detective who walked the scene was thorough. Any idea who might specifically target a home lab? He asked. I shook my head. I'm a materials engineer. Water filtration research. I genuinely can't imagine who would want any of this. He wrote something down. We'll run what we have. After he left, I uploaded the complete security footage to an encrypted server and sent it to Stanton and my attorney. The intruders had removed their face coverings before exiting through the side door, a standard overconfidence error. They'd assumed the cameras were disabled, along with the motion lights, which I'd left deliberately tripped. One of them, Stanton's security contact, identified within 24 hours from employment records. A private contractor with a recent payment trail running through an LLC registered to one of Dillon's shell companies. The second man I recognized from a company photo Reed had forwarded me years ago, back when his brother had started a new job, and he'd been proud enough to share it. His younger brother. All the pieces settled into place with a quietness that felt almost anticlimactic. Reed thought he'd delivered the technology. What he'd actually delivered was a 9-year-old failed prototype and a clean evidentiary trail. I texted Stanton, hook set, let them celebrate. He replied within a minute, now we move. The deal closed on a Thursday morning. Halcyon Water Systems had been watching the patent filings for over a year through their acquisition research team. They flew in from Chicago. 3 people. A conference room at Stanton's office. Windows looking out over the river. Their lead negotiator, a man named Bancroft, had the manner of someone accustomed to being the smartest person in procurement meetings. He laid a term sheet on the table without preamble. We're prepared to offer exclusive global licensing rights, Bancroft said, with an acquisition option at milestone triggers. Our initial offer is on page 4. I turned to page 4. $31 million up front, 4.5% royalty on all commercial units produced under license. A 5-year consulting retainer for technical implementation support. I closed the document and looked at Bancroft. What's your timeline for first commercial installation? I asked. He blinked slightly. Probably expected a different first question. 12 to 18 months pending final regulatory review. We have 3 municipal clients contracted and on standby. I looked at Stanton. He gave me nothing, which was what I needed. Give me 48 hours to review with my attorney, I said. Bancroft extended his hand. We'll be in touch. After they left, Stanton poured 2 glasses of water from a filtered pitcher. I noticed the irony without mentioning it, and set one in front of me. "31 million," he said. "Not bad for a dungeon project." I didn't say anything. Just picked up the glass. The money transferred on a Monday afternoon. I was sitting on the old stool at my now empty workbench when the notification came through. The lab was mostly packed. Bare patches on the walls where equipment had hung, outlines in the concrete where the bench legs had stood for years. Bo was in the corner on his bed, watching me with the patience of a dog who has learned that humans sometimes need to sit still for a while. "We did it," I told him. His tail moved once against the floor. I didn't call anyone, didn't post anything. Just sat in the quiet of a room I'd spent 9 years in, feeling the strange weightlessness of arriving somewhere. You'd spent so long trying to reach that the arrival itself felt almost ordinary. My wife had gotten the downtown condo, the car, and her share of our joint savings, roughly $38,000. I'd signed over everything without argument. To ask hard questions about the condo's equity position, I told him to let her have it. It was arithmetic. The real numbers were in a trust she didn't know existed, protected under a legal structure she'd never thought to ask about. Filed 3 years before the word divorce had ever been spoken in our house. The announcement embargo lasted 6 months. Halcyon needed time to secure supply chain agreements and finalize the regulatory pathway before going public. 6 months felt like nothing. I'd been patient for 9 years. I kept my routine. Mowed the lawn on Saturday mornings. Took Bo on the same evening walks. Bought coffee at the same place I'd been going to since before the marriage. Nothing changed on the outside, because I needed nothing to change. I saw my wife once during that period, in the parking lot of a grocery store. She was with Dylan. I recognized the Range Rover before I saw either of them. She spotted me near the entrance. Her expression cycled through surprise, recalibration, and performed ease in about 2 seconds. She raised her hand. I raised mine and kept walking. Dylan said something to her as I went through the doors. I didn't look back. The announcement went out on a Wednesday. Halcyon issued the press release, the trade journal ran the feature, and the story syndicated across environmental engineering channels and business publications within 2 hours. Engineers, basement patent reshapes, industrial water treatment, $31 million. A photograph of the membrane stack. A quote from Halcyon's CEO, and a photo of me, standing in the empty basement lab, still wearing the flannel shirt my wife had once asked me to donate. My wife was at a morning fitness class when her friend texted her the link. She had to leave the class to sit in her car. I know this because a mutual acquaintance told me the following week, not with cruelty, just with the particular honesty of someone who thought I deserved to know. She'd called her attorney from the parking garage, handshaking, asking about the no contest clause she'd signed without reading closely. Her attorney explained calmly that the trust predated the divorce filing by 3 years, that the intellectual property had never been listed as a marital asset, because it technically was not one, that she had zero claim, zero recourse, and that the window for contesting the settlement had closed. I heard she sat in that parking garage for a long time before she drove home. Dylan spent approximately 1 day processing the news and 2 days quietly putting distance between himself and the situation. He'd been investing in a future that included my wife's assets. The asset she actually had access to turned out to be $38,000 in a condo with a 6-year-old HVAC system. He moved out of the picture within the month. Some people are investors by temperament. They stay only as long as they can see a return. Reed called 2 days after the announcement. I let it go to voicemail. He left a message that was the most carefully constructed 45 seconds I'd ever listened to. Congratulations layered over nervous pleasantries, layered over a question about whether I'd heard anything new from the detective regarding the break-in investigation. He called again the following day. I picked up. "Sherm," he said, "man, that's an incredible thing. I had no idea you were that close." "Thank you, Reed." "Listen, about the break-in. Did the police ever?" "They have a very clear picture of what happened," I said. The footage was comprehensive. My attorney's been building the file for some time." Silence on his end, a long one. Yeah, good. Good that there are leads." "It is," I agreed. "Reed, I have to go." I have calls to return. He started to say something else. I set the phone down on the bench and picked up my coffee. Stanton called that afternoon. Federal case or civil first? Both, I said. Let the prosecutors take the criminal piece. We file civil separately. I'll coordinate with your attorney. Reed and his brother are already flagged. There's more than enough to move on Dylan as the financing party. Reed was arrested at his home office 12 days later. His brother turned himself in the same afternoon, with an attorney and a TAMist, with an attorney already retained. The private contractor who'd handled the break-in had been watching the developments closely and negotiated a cooperation agreement before formal charges were filed. Trading testimony for leniency. Dylan's name appeared in the indictment 3 weeks after that, listed as the source of financing for the shell company. His real estate partnership suspended his operating role within 48 hours of the indictment being made public. I gave my statement to the federal investigators, provided the complete security footage, and let the legal process run. I didn't attend any hearings, didn't want to be in the same room as any of them. There's a kind of justice that doesn't require a witness to be satisfying. This was that kind. I sold the house in the spring. Not because I needed to, but because every room contained a different year of a life I'd already finished living. The kitchen, where she'd slid the envelope across the counter. The hallway where Beau used to wait by the door out of habit. The basement stairs leading down to a room that was just a room now. Concrete floor, bare walls, the faint rectangular outlines where the workbenches had stood for 9 years, pressed into the surface like a negative image. I found a farmhouse in Vermont. 11 acres outside of town with one hardware store and a diner that made real coffee. The property had a creek running through the back of it, cold and clear, and I stood beside it the first afternoon I walked the land and thought about water. How it always finds its own level, how it wears away what blocks it without ever seeming to try, how it doesn't need to force anything. The royalty checks from Halcyon come quarterly. More than I'll spend. I set up a foundation focused on water access projects in rural communities that can't afford conventional treatment infrastructure. The membrane technology scales down as well as it scales up. Pilot units are running now in places where families have been drinking compromised groundwater for decades. That work feels real in a way that the money itself has never quite managed. My neighbor here is a woman named Irene who grows vegetables and has opinions about everything and brings me zucchini, whether I ask for it or not. She knew who I was before I moved in. She had seen the article online. She's the only person in town who ever brought it up directly. One afternoon, she was watching Beau nose around her garden fence, and she asked, without any particular weight to it, "Must have been strange, having something that big and not being able to tell anyone." I thought about it for a moment. "You get used to keeping things to yourself," I said. She nodded, like she understood that on a level that had nothing to do with patents, or technology, or $31 million. A documentary producer reached out in the fall. I agreed to 1 hour on my back porch. No questions about the divorce, specifically. She honored the terms. At the end of the hour, she asked the question everyone eventually asks. "Did it feel like revenge?" she said. I watched a hawk working a thermal over the tree line. Beau was lying at my feet, his muzzle going gray now, his breathing slow, and even in the afternoon quiet. "No," I said. Revenge would have meant I was still thinking about them. What I did was think about the work. The work was always just the work. She wrote that down. Then any regrets. I thought about 9 years in a basement, about my wife's voice carrying through the floorboards when she talked on the phone with her sister, about the February results I sat alone with, in the dark, eating cereal with no one to tell, about Beau following her to the door the morning she left, and her not looking down at him. "One," I said. She waited. I should have understood earlier that her opinion of the work was never going to be the measure of the work. I heard from my ex-wife once, 9 days after the announcement. A text message, just my name, and then, "Can we talk? Please, just 5 minutes." I held the phone for a moment. "Read it twice." Beau came and put his head against my leg. He does that sometimes, without being asked, when he seems to sense that a person is standing at a fork. I deleted the message, put the phone in my jacket pocket, and took my dog down to the creek. The water moved, the way it always moves, without urgency, without drama, finding its path around every obstacle and continuing on. I walked until the light dropped behind the ridge, and the cold came in off the hills, and then I turned around. Bo walked beside me on the path back to the house, his pace slower than it used to be, but steady. Some things you build in secret because the world isn't ready for them yet. Some things you keep quiet because the people you have already decided what you're worth. And correcting them is less important than just doing the work. And some things, the creek, the cold air, a dog walking beside you at the end of a long day, turn out to be the best parts of the whole story. The parts that were never in any press release. The parts that nobody else will ever see. I pulled the door open. Bo stepped inside ahead of me. I wiped my boots on the mat, hung up my jacket, and put the kettle on. Outside, the water kept moving in the dark, carrying everything forward the way water always does. Quiet, and unstoppable, and completely indifferent to who was watching.